Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today I'm joined by Tyler. Tyler, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. I'm Tyler Jordan, and I run Jordan Digital Marketing, which is a company I started as a freelancing shop and then sort of ballooned from there into now about a 30-person digital marketing agency focused on helping venture-backed startups in performance marketing and organic growth.
Excellent. And I know that you do a lot with remote work. So tell me a little bit about your experience assessing the performance of remote workers in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. I started my business completely remote, and I did it largely because I wanted to find a work situation that fit my life rather than fitting my life around a work situation. And as a result, and then once we started bringing on other people, obviously we had to start thinking about these sorts of challenges, how you look at performance and rate people. And so for us, we do biannual reviews. We do reviews twice a year. So we have them at a little bit higher of a frequency than in other places when I worked in-house. And one of the key pieces that I believe in is making sure that people understand where they stand with the company. So we start at the very beginning with an alliance agreement that we work through with all of our employees when they first come on so that we can understand what their personal and professional goals are. And then from there, we break out quarterly goals or rocks or OKRs or however you want to refer to them. Actually, no, wait, those would be rocks. And then work through those on a quarterly basis, checking in on the monthly, and then every 6 months, every 2 quarters, have a review about overall performance. And so that everybody understands like where they stand with the company and within their role and moving towards the next opportunity.
Okay, excellent. That's helpful. Now, within that context, as your people are performing, you need to make sure that there's a culture of trust. And that's something that a lot of leaders have difficulty with in a remote environment. So what do you do to create a culture of trust in a remote environment?
I think one of our biggest core values, one of our most important core values is radical transparency with employees and clients. And so just that was where all of this process is sort of born out of. So I believe to build trust, you have to be open and transparent and honest as much as you can with people. And so that's why we have like these additional touch points. Whereas, you know, when I've worked in office cultures, it's been a little bit less frequent than I think a lot of our check-ins are. And the intention there is to try and build trust and accountability and an understanding of how people are performing, because I think it's a little bit, I don't know that it'd be easier, but it's more well understood if you're in office, how you can communicate. There's like non-verbal communications that might get across in terms of like how you're being perceived or how your work is being appreciated. And we take a little bit more of an intentional approach to make sure that we are driving those points home on a regular, ongoing basis rather than leaving people wondering. Because I think that's one of the issues that I was really worried about when starting a remote work business was, you know, I've heard when remote work doesn't work, I've heard it described as a group of people working as individual freelancers and not being unified by a solid goal or plan. So the way that I've addressed that is by just trying to focus on over communication with our team members. So that's usually, you know, that's how we've planned to handle that situation.
Okay, that's interesting. Let me follow up on that and help me understand how you deal with conflicts or underperformance in that context. So you talk about radical transparency and you have those meetings that you have monthly. What do you do when people underperform? What do you do when there are conflicts?
Well, I think that's where the additional touch points have really helped out, is so that you don't let those issues fester and develop and become bigger issues than they need to be. We're able to be a little bit more quick to handle those on like a monthly, quarterly, or half annually basis, so that people understand when they're off mark or when they are, you know, absolutely killing it. You know, on both sides, you want to make sure that people know that they're either falling short or exceeding expectations, and that there's a plan for them and what you want to do. So if someone is not meeting expectations, we work pretty quickly to help work try to correct those and make clear
Mhm.
how they can improve those. And then what we do is we put together work plans that are essentially short-term roadmaps that allow them to identify which areas that they're falling short in. And then we create a simple like red, yellow, green structure, and it
Mhm.
usually comes in the form of a Google Sheet, and it's clear where they are in terms of performance on any given week and how they're trending and how like what the perception from their manager is as well. So that's usually how we handle stuff like that, is just trying to get out in front of it
Mhm.
quickly rather than letting it, fester, as I said,
Mhm.
and be open and transparent about it through the whole process.
Okay, excellent. Now let's talk about the other end of things, which is professional development. So not correcting underperformance, but improving performance. What do you do to support remote employees and ensure that they still develop professionally effectively?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that we took a little bit of greater emphasis on earlier on than maybe we would have if we were all in office together. Because I've worked for agencies where it was a relatively flat environment and there wasn't a lot of upward mobility for your career. And so what we have is we have a fully built out career track for everybody on both sides of the house. We have like the organic growth piece and the performance marketing piece, and the roles are not necessarily in direct parity with one another, but there is clear paths for each of them to go. And we've actually also created IC paths versus managerial paths to try and understand and acknowledge that not everybody wants to go in the same direction. And what we do is within those quarterly goals and biannual reviews, work on defining what people need to do to get to the next level. And those actually pretty similar to underperforming employees, is we usually build out a roadmap for people to get to where they need to be as they get closer, because a lot of times people get to a point where they're outperforming their role, but then they need to also adopt a series of habits or grow skills that allow them to move into their next role. So there's a little bit of a, I don't want to say gray area, but there's a little bit of a jump that needs to happen for them to move into the responsibilities of the new role as they're outgrowing the previous role. So we usually put together a similar roadmap of how they need to get there, and track performance accordingly, and just stay really close with our people. And that's how we handle it.
Okay, that's helpful. Now, what about onboarding people? So you talked about existing employees and their professional development. What do you do to make sure that people are onboarded effectively, that they're mentored effectively in the early parts of the job?
Yeah. Admittedly, this is an area where we were, well, I very specifically was very bad early on, because I think this is one of the areas where the first couple of weeks of an employee's experience working for you really set the tone for how the rest of the employment experience is going to be. So with the first couple of hires, it was me as an overworked freelancer hiring a couple of people to help me out and not being able to dedicate the amount of time that I needed to dedicate to help them be successful. And so what we built out was this system where I would do daily check-ins with everybody. Well, first, let me start. The first thing I would do is ask everybody to start a Google Doc and just take notes on the experience and tell me where I, missed the mark personally in their onboarding. And the first couple people, there was like a page, 2 pages, and then it got down to a paragraph or 2 paragraphs to a sentence to one, and it kept getting shorter and shorter, those feedback documents. But we started doing like check-ins, almost like daily stand-ups for 15-20 minutes at the very beginning of the day, and make sure that if there was any issues that I understood them and that we were working through them. And then regular weekly meetings, and then we would do client meetings as we would onboard people and do the actual client meeting where we would prep for the client meeting, and then meeting where we would talk tactically about the work. So again, it was just about over communicating and making yourself more available, which is, I think, one of the big differences between remote work culture and in-office culture. At an in-office culture, it's very easy for you to just sort of peek your head in between monitors and ask some questions of your neighbors, whereas you need to be a little bit more intentional on the remote side, and you need to set up a space for those types of conversations to happen that might otherwise happen a little bit more organically in an in-office situation.
Okay, that's helpful. Interesting. So something I've helped like 26 companies figure out their flexible work schedule. And you talked about onboarding, which is great, but you didn't mention mentoring, which I think is very important. And I found that to be quite crucial for getting junior team members from not for those first 3 months, but from the first 3 months to the first 3 years to have them be really successful. So I'm curious if you do any mentoring from other people, not from yourself, not coaching, meaning not direct supervision, but having mentors for your people within your team.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I also described like how our onboarding process developed and evolved over time rather than where it is now. So like where it is now, we have a new hire buddy to help sort of like help you navigate things as you get through. And then we have an informal mentorship program where you work with someone who is usually not your manager, occasionally is your manager, that helps you sort of navigate longer term things, because the new hire buddy specifically is somebody who is definitely not your manager, because there's a lot of things as a new hire you maybe don't bring up because you don't want to bring it up to your manager, because you don't want to be seen as, you know, not knowing what you're doing or being ill prepared or being, you know, having missed something they told you and then you can't figure out where it is. It's a lot lower risk to go to somebody who is a peer and ask them that help than it is for you to ask that of your manager. So we set up an environment for that to happen. And admittedly, right now, the mentorship program for us internally is very informal, and it probably should be something that we formalize over the course of the next year. So I think that's a really good point that you make, is we've sort of formalized a process around new hire mentorship, well, not really necessarily mentorship, but like assistance to get them up to speed, but not necessarily longer term. But we do have that very much as an informal process where we have, you know, and it usually comes about pretty organically, where, you know, people who work together help each other out over the longer term to get where they need to be personally and professionally as an employee here.
Yeah, it sounds like a good plan to make it more structured over the next year. Now, I want to also ask you something you mentioned before about the communication between different folks. So how do you facilitate effective team collaboration and communication in these remote settings?
Wait, sorry, can you repeat the question? I just want to make sure that I answered it
Sure.
appropriately.
How do you facilitate effective remote communication and collaboration?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think one of the big things that we try to do is, like I said before, is trying to create spaces for that collaboration to happen, because it will happen a little bit, it's harder for it to happen more organically. So we will set short check-ins on certain projects that we're working on to make sure that there is opportunities for those. And right now we're actually in the process of finding opportunities for our two departments to work together more frequently, and building an environment where we can do that more effectively. So the big thing for us, though, that I found personally, is that leadership needs to be more of a forcing function and making sure that those happen, because you know, like I mentioned, and when I've worked in office, it's really easy to sort of sit in a pod and like be able to ask questions of your neighbor. It's a lot more difficult, and not everybody's skill set to be able to do that in a remote setting. Certain people adopt that process really easily in a remote setting, but not everybody does. So being able to encourage someone who might otherwise be a little bit more introverted to work on a project collaborating with another employee, like being more intentional about how you set up those meetings so those actually happen, has been something that we've really focused on doing here, rather than just counting on them happening organically as you would in an in-office setting.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Tyler. Is there anything else I haven't asked you that you would like to share before we wrap up?
I mean, I think one of the big things that I just love talking about is just, I think remote work is such an important part of the evolution of work that I'm really excited to see how things go. And I think all of these things that I've talked about are really the way that I would have liked to have been treated in an in-office situation also. So I think the big thing is when people hear people talking about remote work and how they're treating things and how they're handling their people in these remote work settings, there's a lot to be learned here for in-office culture too, because a lot of these things are born out of the fact that I didn't get the support that I wanted to get when I was working in an office. And these were just my way of adopting strategies to deal with it. And I did it in a remote setting because personally what I wanted for myself was a location independent lifestyle, so that I could, you know, do what I wanted to do and build a job that fit my life rather than fitting my life around a job. But I still wish that like I probably wouldn't be here if like the companies that I worked for adopted these strategies to their in-office culture as well. So yeah, that's the last like soapbox spiel I'll give.
No, that's a really nice message to end on, Tyler. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Excellent. And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and helps us improve the show.